rural land where folks are registered gun owners. There's a situation unfolding in a rural area of Oregon this past weekend that's caught the imagination of the news cycle here. Armed militiamen taking over a federal wildlife refuge. This is a federal government facility that they've occupied.
Yes.
One question I have, are they terrorists or are they just merely occupants of this
I
building?
know there's some differences of opinion on that, but in my opinion, they're certainly not terrorists. I mean, terrorists, there's differences of opinions on the definition of what a terrorist is, but terrorism obviously is when someone uses criminal acts to get their point across, and obviously these people have not done anything criminal yet as far as that goes.
What about the occupying of the building itself?
I mean, again, we're on the other side of the country here, and that's my only concern because I've heard a lot of news reports. First off, there's a lot of history with this situation that's going on out there. And I watched several news reports over the past couple of days, and you hear some say, well, there's a handful of these people occupying that. Then you hear there's a dozen. Then there's dozens. I actually heard a news report this morning when I was in the kitchen, before I left for work. There are hundreds out there. So I mean, what really is it? Is it a few people? Is it the media hyping it up? I really don't know. I looked at some comments from the sheriff out there. He's got an open line of communication with these folks. Things are progressing, I think is the word that he used. So I don't think it's fair for us to, talk specifics about that particular situation. My main concern would be, this thing, whatever the resolution is, we want it to be peaceful. The last thing you want someone to do is to start, discharging a firearm, because then we know what the end result would be. Obviously people getting hurt or getting killed, and we certainly don't want that. Is this truly, are they just occupying, like we saw in other bigger cities around the country for different reasons in times past? Again, I really don't know, so I'm not really comfortable with, talking specifics about that. I listened to some of the videos of some of the folks who are actually there camping out, and they've got a few points of concern that I don't know as though I agree with everything they're saying, but some of their concerns, were these farmers originally, were they given the rights to use that land? How did someone end up putting 1,000 cattle out on some land that they're not supposed to, and then allowed to do it for decades, and now they can't? You know what I mean? I think there's a lot more history here to this whole thing than we're getting.
And the history was that this particular land was, I guess, allocated back in 1908 by Theodore Roosevelt as a land area to help migratory birds, and apparently the idea being that it's a federal wildlife refuge for folks who might want to look at these
exactly
these migratory birds.
My only concern, if that's what it was really allowed for, how did they let farmers take over this or utilize this land to have thousands of cattle on it for all these years? And number one, how did that happen? And if there was a problem with it, why didn't they address it years ago? You know what I mean? So I really don't know the history there.
If they're occupying a federal building, though, and it's in your domain, for instance, like suppose it was at the I know the Montezuma one is not.
That's Onondaga County.
It's Onondaga County. That's something similar to that, or occurring within your domain.
Well, obviously, if there's a crime being a crime that's occurring, and again, we don't know if we could hypothetical this all day, but if there is a situation where someone is trespassing or some type of crime occurring, then obviously you've got to enforce the law. I mean, and I think in this situation, the two gentlemen, the father and son, who were, or I think it was father and son, the ones that were convicted that are going to serve their prison time beginning today, they're not even part of this, and they're telling these
and they
people
don't want to be part of it.
That's right. So, again, we see some of the other protests around the country in bigger cities for other reasons. A lot of the, when cities were looted and buildings were damaged, the people that were living there were pleading with these people, please don't come here and do this damage. I mean, if you want to come and protest, that's fine, because that's how this thing started over the weekend. It was a peaceful protest of about 300 people. Actually, I think they called it a parade.
It was.
It was an actual parade. And according to the sheriff, that went well. It's the after effect, and when these other people came in, that's when some of these problems occurred.
Talking to Sheriff Rob Maciol on the Talk of the Town at 100.7 FM WUTQ about gun control as a larger issue, but then also about the armed militia takeover of the federal wildlife refuge in Oregon. Mark Wolber, our legal correspondent, on the phone with us right now. You might want to put the headphones on there, Rob, so you can listen to what Mark has to say about the legal ramifications of this takeover by these militiamen in Oregon, and they're claiming that it's their constitutional right to reclaim this land. We've heard this idea of a land claim issue before locally. What are the legal ramifications here?
Well, there is a First Amendment right to free speech. That does not apply, however, when you're going to be violating other laws. You can't justify criminal acts by saying this is your right to free speech. They are going to be charged with occupying a federal facility. They're going to be charged with having possession of weapons in a federal facility. Once you have a federal government building, then state law is secondary and federal law trumps, and they're going to be looking at various federal charges. It'll be prosecuted by a United States attorney. Their idea that they're going to be reclaiming land from the federal government, it doesn't work that way. If they feel that they have some legal basis to reclaim some property, the only way they're going to be able to do that without causing themselves some criminal problems is to try to do it in court. You can't just engage in self-help and think you're going to get away with it. So they're all facing criminal charges as far as I can see.
And so do the law enforcement officials out there push this particular agenda on their end and try and remove these people physically from this particular wildlife refuge, Sheriff Maciol? And if that's the case, what happens in that regard?
I think the key is accomplishing that without, like I said, without anyone getting hurt, without shots being fired. So I think that's where, as I looked at some of the things that the sheriff out there said, that his line of communications is open with these people and it's progressing. So I think it's a very sensitive situation because obviously, like I said, if a law is broken, then the law has to be enforced. But at the same time, we certainly don't want these people, shooting back at each other. You look at some of the video footage; it looks like traffic is flowing. There's very little police presence there. I mean, at least marked police presence. So again, I don't know if it's some of the media outlets pushing this to a little more than what it is. I don't know. Again, we're on the other side of the country, so I'm not really in tune with what specifically is going on there.
And reading through some of the stuff that the sheriff did say, some of his comments, he is taking this very cautiously, and I think he's letting the situation play out a little bit so we don't run into something, as you mentioned, a standoff situation where maybe gunfire is exchanged.
Exactly.
As far as law enforcement, I believe as of last night, they stated there was maybe one marked car at the front of the driveway, but they were letting individuals in and out with some supplies.
Exactly, because I can't believe, I mean, obviously, if the situation was that tense and that sensitive, you'd have a much heavier police presence, because we have to be honest here, but whether it's the federal government we're talking about or state government or local governments, the county sheriff's offices, the law enforcement agencies are prepared to keep people safe. So, obviously, if it came right down to it, I certainly wouldn't want to see that, but I don't know how much of a standoff it would actually be.
And Mark, according to you, the law enforcement officials out there, the federal officials, have the right to ask them to leave, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of politics that plays into this, because the law enforcement officers probably have a right to go in and force them out and engage in whatever physical actions that are necessary in order to remove them from the building. But from a political standpoint, they don't really want to do this unless they think that it's absolutely necessary. And as Rob says, safety is important. They want to keep everyone safe. You want to keep the law enforcement officers safe. You don't want to engage in a shootout and risk the safety of the law enforcement officers who are going to be enforcing this law. And as it stands, if they let them stay there and eventually they surrender, or if they starve them out, they can turn off the power, they can turn off heat, they can prevent them from getting food sources, and that may force them out. But you don't want to have another Waco where they go in there with guns blazing and killing people, and then you find out that there may be some innocent people who are children. Who knows who's in that building? But I think that what Rob says is right. You've got to be very careful when you start engaging in any type of armed combat in a situation where you have people involved, and you try to preserve the safety for everybody. You don't want to engage in unnecessary
Yeah, I don't believe there are other occupants in the building at this point or workers. But is it not a crime to have a weapon inside a federal building? And if these guys have loaded weapons inside a federal building, and obviously it's a different situation if it were a heavily populated building in a downtown area, which is not the case.
I think that's the whole thing. You take each of these on a case by case basis, and the one thing that law enforcement has on their side is time. Like Mark had said, you cut off their food supply, you shut off the lights, whatever. Eventually, someone's got to give in. And at the end of the day, the last thing you want to do is have a shootout over, a criminal trespass charge on a trespassing charge on federal grounds. You wouldn't want to end up with, several people deceased or shot and injured or so. It's one of those things. But at the same time, if a law is being broken, obviously there's a line that's drawn, and the police have an obligation to enforce the law. So it's a situation where, obviously we're going to watch closely just to see how it unfolds. But at the same time, we want it to come. Obviously, we want all these situations to come to a peaceful end.
Mm-hmm. And of course, would you say time is on the law enforcement side? You're right. These guys aren't going anywhere. It's not like they're going to escape. It's not like they're out causing any more violence or causing any injury to anyone. They're in a confined area. They know where they are. They're not going to go anywhere. And eventually, at some point, they're going to face the charges. And to answer your question, Dave, yes, it is a crime to carry a weapon in a federal building. It's well posted. If you go in the U.S. building in Utica, where they have the courthouse, they have the Social Security office, there's signs all over the place that it is a federal crime to bring a weapon in here. You can't even bring a camera in there in the courthouse. So yeah, there are plenty of charges that will be filed against them when they eventually are brought into custody, unless there's a shootout at some point that I would think would be initiated by the people who are holding the building. But I don't think law enforcement is going to want to initiate a shootout in a case where there isn't. Right now, you don't have a danger to anyone else. As far as I understand, there's no danger to third parties, so there's no need to do anything. There's no need to rush to get these people out of there. They can let them stay there for a while and let them eventually surrender without violence is what you hope to happen. Exactly. Now, it's a different situation if they're threatening the lives of other people, if they have hostages, if they are threatening to do damage or to blow up some buildings in the nearby area. That's a different situation, but you don't have that here.
Mark, maybe you or even the sheriff could comment on this. What if at this point right now, as we're speaking, they're packing up their belongings and just peacefully heading out? Will they still be charged? Will there still be ramifications?
Absolutely, yes. They've committed the crime. You can't commit the crime and then say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I did it. Let me just walk away peacefully."
Exactly. I think you have to do that because the minute if you didn't do that like that or in any other situation, you've just allowed something that that again will happen again. Set the stage for something more dramatic to happen.
Right, Mark. Thanks for your perspective. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mark. Happy New Year.
And Rob,
New Year.
same to you. Thanks for coming in and clearing up some of these issues for us.
Absolutely, anytime.